The rope burns on Helena Dawson's wrists had barely healed when she felt the cold metal of the shackles click shut around them again, and she knew with absolute certainty that her brief taste of freedom had cost her more than just another capture. The autumn sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets of Paradise, Nevada in 1878, and the three men who had dragged her back into town after 5 days on the run looked at her with a mixture of triumph and cruelty that made her stomach twist with fear. She had stolen a horse, ridden through the night until her legs ached and her throat burned with thirst, hidden in abandoned mine shafts and survived on wild berries and creek water, but somehow they had found her trail near the California border and brought her back in chains. The Wells Fargo office where they kept prisoners awaiting trial stood at the end of Main Street, a squat building with iron bars on the windows that had held her for 3 weeks before her first escape. Helena had committed no real crime beyond being born to the wrong man, a gambler who had accumulated debts across 3 states and then vanished, leaving his 22-year-old daughter to face the consequences. The men who claimed her father owed them money had decided she would work off his debt at one of their establishments in Virginia City, a fate Helena would rather die than accept. Her first escape had been desperate and poorly planned, but she had made it out of that locked room by picking the lock with a hairpin and climbing through a window barely wide enough for her slender frame. "Thought you were clever, did you not?" The leader of the 3 men, a greasy character named Sullivan with tobacco-stained teeth, shoved her roughly toward the building. "This time there will not be any hairpins or open windows. This time we will make sure you stay put until we can transport you north." Helena stumbled but kept her chin high, her dark hair falling in tangled waves around her face. Her dress was torn and filthy from days of rough travel, but her green eyes blazed with defiance. She would find another way. She always found another way. Her mother had taught her that before dying of fever when Helena was 15, leaving her alone with a father who cared more for cards than his own daughter's welfare. "Move along." Sullivan pushed her again, and Helena bit back the sharp retort that rose to her lips. Antagonizing them would gain her nothing but more bruises to add to the collection already blooming across her arms and ribs. The door to the Wells Fargo office swung open, and a man stepped out into the sunlight, tall and broad-shouldered with a black Stetson pulled low over his eyes. He wore the star of a deputy marshal on his vest, and Helena's heart sank further. A lawman. That meant her situation had just become official, not just the private vendetta of angry creditors, but an actual legal matter. "That is the girl?" The deputy marshal's voice was deep and measured, with a slight drawl that marked him as someone who had spent time in Texas or perhaps Oklahoma Territory. "That is her," Sullivan confirmed eagerly. "Helena Dawson, daughter of Robert Dawson, who owes my employer nearly $3,000. She escaped custody 5 days ago, and we have brought her back as requested." The deputy marshal's gaze shifted to Helena, and she found herself looking into eyes the color of slate, steady and unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 27 or 28, with a strong jaw and a mouth set in a firm line. Everything about him spoke of control and competence, from the well-maintained Colt revolver at his hip to the way he stood, balanced and alert. "Vincent Zane," he introduced himself, though Helena had not asked. "I will be handling Miss Dawson's case from here. You gentlemen can collect your reward at the marshal's office." Sullivan looked uncertain. "We were told we could transport her ourselves to Virginia City once the paperwork was completed." "Plans have changed." Vincent Zane's tone left no room for argument. "The territorial judge wants to review the debt claim before any transfer occurs. Miss Dawson will remain in federal custody until the matter is resolved." Helena watched this exchange with growing confusion. She had expected to be thrown back into that locked room and guarded until Sullivan and his associates could drag her north to a fate worse than prison. Instead, this deputy marshal was asserting authority over her case in a way that seemed to displease her captors considerably. "Now see here," Sullivan began, his face reddening. "I see perfectly well. Vincent Zane took a step forward, and despite being outnumbered 3-1, something in his bearing made Sullivan take an involuntary step back. Miss Dawson is a federal prisoner now, and unless you want to contest that designation with Marshal Garrett in Carson City, I suggest you take your reward money and be grateful you will not be facing charges for the condition in which you returned her. Helena glanced down at her torn dress and bruised arms, understanding dawning. This deputy marshal was not on Sullivan's side at all. The question was why. Sullivan muttered something under his breath, but jerked his head at his companions, and the three of them stalked off toward the marshal's office, leaving Helena alone with Vincent Zane in the dusty street. She waited for him to grab her arm or push her toward the door, but instead he simply gestured. "Inside, Miss Dawson, we have matters to discuss." The Wells Fargo office had been converted into a temporary holding facility, with a small desk and 2 chairs in the front room and a locked door leading to the cells in back. Vincent Zane did not take her to the cells. Instead, he pulled out one of the chairs and indicated she should sit. When she hesitated, he removed his hat and set it on the desk, running a hand through dark hair that was slightly too long for regulation length. "Sit down," he repeated, less formally this time. "I am not going to hurt you, and I suspect you are exhausted." Helena sat because her legs were shaking and because something in his voice suggested he was telling the truth. She watched him warily as he poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup and handed it to her. The shackles on her wrists made drinking awkward, but she managed, the cool water soothing her parched throat. "How much of your father's debt is legitimate?" Vincent asked, settling into the other chair and studying her with those steady gray eyes. "I do not know," Helena admitted. "My father gambled. He always gambled. But $3,000 seems excessive, and I have no way to verify what he actually owed versus what they claim he owed." "Your father is gone?" "Disappeared 6 months ago. I have not seen or heard from him since." Vincent nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he already suspected. "And you have been on your own since then?" "I worked as a seamstress in Carson City for a while. I had a room at a boarding house, and I was managing." Helena's voice grew harder. "Then Sullivan and his men showed up 3 weeks ago claiming I was responsible for my father's debts and that I needed to come with them. When I refused, they obtained some sort of writ from a crooked judge in Virginia City and had me arrested. I was being held here waiting for transport when I escaped the first time. Why did you come back to Nevada if you knew people were looking for you?" "I did not come back. I was trying to reach California to get far enough away that they could not find me." Helena's shoulders sagged. "Obviously, I did not make it." Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming thoughtfully on the desk. "The territorial judge in Carson City is an honest man named Harrison. I sent him a telegram when I first heard about your case, and he is very interested in reviewing the debt claim. He has seen too many young women forced into prostitution based on fabricated or exaggerated debts, and he is determined to stop the practice." Hope flickered in Helena's chest, small and fragile. "So I will not be sent to Virginia City?" "Not if I can help it." Vincent's expression remained serious. "But that puts us in a complicated position. Sullivan and his employer have enough influence that they might try to take matters into their own hands if they realize the legal route is closing. They already proved they can track you once. If you run again, they will catch you again, and next time I might not be here to intercede." "So what are you suggesting?" Helena tried to keep the bitterness from her voice. "That I simply stay locked up until this judge decides my fate? I am suggesting that your best chance of surviving this situation is to stay close to someone who can protect you." Vincent leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Judge Harrison is traveling on circuit and will not be back in Carson City for another 2 weeks. Until then, you will remain in my custody as your prisoner. As someone under federal protection." He reached across and unlocked the shackles on her wrists with a key from his pocket. "I give you my word, Miss Dawson, that I will not allow you to be taken against your will to Virginia City or anywhere else. But you have to trust me enough not to run again." Helena rubbed her sore wrists, feeling the blood flow return to her hands. Every instinct she had developed over the past 6 months of running and hiding told her to trust no one, especially not a lawman who might be working his own angle. But something in Vincent Zane's steady gaze and quiet certainty made her want to believe him. "Why are you helping me?" she asked finally. "You do not know me. You have no reason to put yourself at risk for my sake." Vincent stood and walked to the window, looking out at the dusty street where Sullivan and his men had disappeared. 5 years ago, my sister found herself in a situation similar to yours. A man claimed she owed him money, claimed she had signed a contract agreeing to work for him. She had not signed anything, but the local law did not care. They were going to hand her over anyway. He turned back to face Helena, and she saw something dark and pained in his expression. I was too far away to help her. By the time I got there, she had been working in a saloon in Cheyenne for 3 months. She had laudanum in her system when she threw herself from a 3rd-story window. Helena's breath caught in her throat. "I am so sorry." Her name was Margaret. She was 19 years old. Vincent's voice was flat, controlled, but Helena could hear the grief beneath it. "I became a deputy marshal because I wanted to have the authority to help women like her, like you. So when I heard about your case, I made sure I was assigned to it. That is why I am helping you, Miss Dawson, because no one helped Margaret." The room fell silent except for the distant sounds of Paradise's main street, horses and wagons, and the occasional shout from the saloon down the way. Helena felt tears prick her eyes, the first she had allowed herself to cry since Sullivan had recaptured her. This man, this stranger with the sad gray eyes and the badge on his chest, was offering her something she had not had in a very long time: genuine help without expectation of anything in return. "What do I need to do?" she asked quietly. "For now, get cleaned up and rest. There is a boarding house 2 doors down run by a woman named Mrs. Chen. She has a room available, and I have already arranged for you to stay there. I will be staying in the room next door." He pulled some bills from his pocket and set them on the desk. "This should cover food and any supplies you need for the next 2 weeks. Once Judge Harrison rules on your case, we will determine next steps." Helena stared at the money, then at Vincent. "You're not locking me up?" "I could, but I do not think you will run." He picked up his hat and settled it back on his head. "Will you?" It was a test, Helena realized. He was offering her trust and freedom, betting that she would not betray him. And the truth was, she had nowhere to go and no resources left to get there. More than that, though, she wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, the law could work in her favor for once. "I will not run," she promised, and meant it. Over the next 3 days, Helena discovered that Paradise, Nevada, was a mining town in slow decline, its silver veins playing out and its population drifting away to richer strikes elsewhere. The boarding house where Mrs. Chen provided her with a clean room and hot meals was comfortable enough, and Helena spent her time mending her torn clothes and trying not to think about what would happen if Judge Harrison ruled against her. Vincent checked on her twice a day, morning and evening, a routine that quickly became familiar. He never stayed long, just enough to make sure she had everything she needed and to update her on any news from Carson City. He was unfailingly polite and professional, keeping a careful distance that Helena appreciated even as she found herself growing curious about the man behind the badge. On the 4th day, she asked Mrs. Chen about him while helping the older woman prepare dinner in the boarding house kitchen. "Deputy Zane is a good man, Mrs." Chen said firmly, her hands expertly chopping vegetables for a stew. "He arrived in Paradise 2 months ago, and he has been nothing but respectful. Some of the miners try to cause trouble when they have been drinking, but he handles them fairly, never uses his gun unless he has no choice." "Does he talk about his past?" Mrs. Chen glanced at her shrewdly. "He told you about his sister, then?" "He does not share that story with many people. It affected him deeply, I think. He carries it with him." Helena stirred the pot on the stove, breathing in the rich aroma of beef and herbs. "He seems very dedicated to his work?" "He is dedicated to doing what is right, which is not always the same thing." Mrs. Chen added the vegetables to the pot. "You are safe with him, Miss Dawson. He will protect you." That evening, When Vincent came by for his usual check, Helena invited him to join her for dinner on the boarding house's front porch. He hesitated, then accepted, and they sat in rocking chairs watching the sun set over the distant mountains while eating Mrs. Chen's excellent stew. "Tell me about Texas," Helena said, breaking the comfortable silence. "That is where you are from, is it not? Your accent gives you away." Vincent smiled slightly, the first real smile she had seen from him. "Born and raised in San Antonio. My father was a rancher, ran cattle from Texas to Kansas until the railroads changed everything. I worked for him until I was 20, then joined the Rangers for a few years before transferring to the Marshal Service." "Why did you leave Texas?" His smile faded. "Too many memories after Margaret died. I needed a fresh start somewhere she had never been." He set his empty bowl aside and leaned back in the chair. "What about you? Where are you from originally?" "St. Louis, believe it or not. My mother brought me west when I was 10, chasing after my father, who was chasing gold strikes and gambling opportunities." Helena gazed at the darkening sky. She always believed he would settle down eventually, become the husband and father she wanted him to be. She died still believing it. "And you stopped believing?" "I learned that people do not change just because you want them to. My father was a gambler and a dreamer, and nothing I did was ever going to make him into anything else." She glanced at Vincent. "Does that make me cynical?" "It makes you realistic." He stood collecting their bowls. "I should let you rest. Morning comes early." But Helena did not want him to leave yet. She had spent so many days alone and afraid, and his steady presence was comforting in a way she had not experienced in years. "Stay a little longer," she heard herself say. "Please." Vincent paused, then settled back into the rocking chair. "What would you like to talk about?" They talked until the stars came out, about books they had read and places they had seen, about the changing West and what it meant for people like them. Vincent spoke about his belief that civilization would eventually tame the frontier, that law and order would replace the chaos of gold rushes and range wars. Helena shared her dreams of opening her own dress shop someday, of creating beautiful things with her hands, and being beholden to no one. "You are very skilled with a needle," Vincent observed. "I noticed you repaired your dress so well that you can barely see where it was torn." "My mother taught me. She said a woman who could sew well would never starve, because people always needed clothes." Helena smiled at the memory. She was right about that, at least. When Vincent finally stood to leave, he paused at the porch steps. "Thank you for dinner and conversation, Miss Dawson. It was pleasant." "Please call me Helena. I think we've moved beyond formalities." "Helena, then." He touched the brim of his hat. "Sleep well." She watched him walk to the room he had taken in the building next door, and something warm and unfamiliar stirred in her chest. She told herself it was simply gratitude, relief at having an ally after so long alone. But as she prepared for bed that night, she could not stop thinking about the way Vincent's eyes had softened when he smiled, or the deep timbre of his voice when he spoke about things he cared about. The next morning, Sullivan appeared at the boarding house while Vincent was making his rounds through town. Helena was sitting on the porch with her sewing when she saw him approaching, and fear shot through her like ice water. "Miss Dawson," Sullivan said, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps, "we need to talk." "I have nothing to say to you." Helena kept her voice steady despite her pounding heart. "Deputy Zane said I am in federal custody now." "About that." Sullivan's smile was predatory. "My employer is losing patience with these legal delays. He sent me to deliver a message. You can come with us willingly to Virginia City and work off your father's debt, or we can make things very difficult for you and your deputy marshal friend." "Are you threatening a federal officer?" "I am stating facts." Sullivan took a step closer. "Vincent Zane is one man. Accidents happen in mining towns, cave-ins, fires, shootings. Would be a shame if something happened to him because of you." Helena stood, her hands clenched into fists. "Get off this porch before I scream for help." "Scream all you want. By the time anyone arrives, I will be long gone." Sullivan pulled a folded paper from his pocket and tossed it onto the porch boards. That is the address in Virginia City where you need to report. You have 3 days to make up your mind. After that, the offer expires and we do things the hard way." He walked away before Helena could respond, disappearing into the morning crowd on Main Street. She picked up the paper with shaking hands and was about to crumple it when Vincent appeared, his expression dark. "I saw him leaving." "What did he want?" Helena handed him the paper. "He gave me an ultimatum. 3 days to surrender myself willingly or they will hurt you to get to me." Vincent read the paper, his jaw tightening. "Did he threaten you directly?" "He threatened you. Said accidents happen in mining towns." Helena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the morning heat. "Maybe I should just go. If it means keeping you safe." "No." Vincent's voice was firm. He crumpled the paper and shoved it in his pocket. "That is exactly what they want. They're trying to scare you into compliance. It will not work. You cannot protect me every moment of every day." "I can try." He moved closer, and Helena found herself looking up into those steady gray eyes. "I told you I would not let them take you, and I meant it. Sullivan is bluffing. He knows that if anything happens to a federal officer, every marshal and ranger in 3 territories will hunt him down." Helena wanted to believe him, but she had seen the calculation in Sullivan's eyes. These men do not care about consequences. They are used to taking what they want. Then they are going to learn a hard lesson about federal law. Vincent's hand moved as if to touch her shoulder, then dropped back to his side. "Trust me, Helena, please." The way he said her name, gentle and earnest, made her decision easy. "I trust you." That afternoon, Vincent sent several telegrams and had a long conversation with the town's sheriff, an older man named Patterson, who agreed to provide additional support if Sullivan tried anything. Helena watched these preparations from the boarding house, feeling both protected and guilty that Vincent was going to such lengths for her sake. That evening, Mrs. Chen invited them both for dinner in her private dining room, seeming to sense that the situation was becoming more serious. The older woman served them roasted chicken and potatoes while sharing stories about her own journey from China to California and eventually to Nevada, a tale of hardship and perseverance that made Helena's own troubles seem less overwhelming. "You will survive this," Mrs. Chen told her firmly as she cleared the plates. "You are stronger than you know, and you have good help." She glanced meaningfully at Vincent before leaving them alone. "She is a remarkable woman," Vincent said, pouring coffee for both of them. "She arrived in Paradise 15 years ago with nothing and built this boarding house from the ground up. The miners respect her more than they respect most of the town officials." "She reminds me of my mother," Helena said softly, "the determination, the practicality. My mother could make a home anywhere, no matter how temporary or rough. You have that same quality." Vincent met her eyes across the table. "You have been through hell these past months, but you have not broken. You escaped once against impossible odds. You survived 5 days alone in the wilderness. You stood up to Sullivan this morning when most people would have cowered. That takes real strength." Helena felt heat rise in her cheeks at the praise. "I was terrified. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting despite it." He smiled that rare smile again. "You are courageous, Helena Dawson." She did not know how to respond to that, so she sipped her coffee and changed the subject. "Tell me more about your work as a marshal. Do you enjoy it?" They talked for hours again, the conversation flowing easily as they learned more about each other. Vincent spoke about the satisfaction of bringing criminals to justice, but also the frustration of dealing with corrupt local officials who valued money over law. Helena shared her dream of someday opening that dress shop in San Francisco, a city she had never seen but had heard was full of opportunity for someone willing to work hard. "Why San Francisco?" Vincent asked. "Because it is far from everywhere I've been. A fresh start, like you said about leaving Texas." She traced the rim of her coffee cup with one finger. "And because I want to live somewhere beautiful, somewhere I can walk to the ocean and remember that the world is bigger than my problems." "That sounds nice." Vincent's expression grew wistful. "I have never seen the ocean either. Maybe someday you will." "Maybe." But his tone suggested he did not really believe it, that he was too caught up in his work and his guilt over Margaret to imagine a future that involved something as frivolous as sightseeing. Helena wanted to tell him that he deserved happiness too, that dedicating his life to helping others was noble, but he could not forget to live his own life as well. But she held her tongue, knowing he would not hear it yet. They had only known each other for 5 days. She had no right to lecture him about his choices. Yet, as she said goodnight and returned to her room, she found herself thinking about what it might be like if Vincent came to San Francisco with her someday. The thought made her smile even as she recognized how foolish it was. He was a deputy marshal with a duty to uphold. She was a woman running from debts that might or might not be real. Their paths had crossed by chance, and once Judge Harrison resolved her case, they would go their separate ways. The thought made her unexpectedly sad. The next 2 days passed in a strange limbo of tension and growing closeness. Vincent increased his patrols around the boarding house, and Helena noticed he always kept one hand near his revolver when he was outside. Sullivan did not reappear, but his presence hung over them like a storm cloud waiting to break. Helena spent her time sewing, repairing torn garments for Mrs. Chen and some of the other boarding house residents. The work kept her hands busy and her mind focused, and several people commented on her skill. One miner even asked if she would make him a new shirt, offering to pay in silver. Helena accepted, grateful for something productive to do. Vincent started joining her on the porch in the evenings after his rounds were finished, bringing coffee or sometimes a piece of pie from the town's bakery. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their pasts and opinions about the present. Helena learned that Vincent loved to read but had precious little time for it, that his favorite food was his mother's enchiladas, though he had not tasted them in years, that he sometimes missed Texas so badly it was a physical ache in his chest. She told him about the dress shop she dreamed of opening, describing in detail the designs she would create and the fabrics she would use. She admitted that she sometimes felt guilty for dreaming about something so frivolous when there was so much hardship in the world, but Vincent shook his head firmly. "Beauty is not frivolous," he said. "People need beautiful things to remind them that life is worth living. Creating beauty is as important as upholding justice, maybe more so." Helena treasured that statement, turning it over in her mind after he left each night. This serious lawman, with his tragic past and his dedication to duty, understood something fundamental about her that even she had sometimes doubted. It made her want to know him better, to understand what lay beneath that controlled exterior. On the 7th day, a telegram arrived from Carson City. Judge Harrison would arrive in Paradise in 3 days to review Helena's case personally, rather than waiting for her to travel to him. Vincent brought her the news with obvious satisfaction. "This is good," he said, standing in the boarding house parlor where Helena had been reading. "Harrison coming here means he considers your case important enough to warrant immediate attention, and it means Sullivan cannot intercept you on the road to Carson City." "Will the judge rule in my favor?" Helena closed her book, anxiety knotting her stomach. "I cannot promise anything, but Harrison is fair, and I believe he will see through Sullivan's fraud." Vincent sat down across from her, his expression serious. "Whatever happens, Helena, you will not face it alone." She believed him. Over the past week, Vincent Zane had become more than just her protector. He had become her friend, someone she could rely on and confide in. The attraction she felt toward him was growing stronger each day, though she tried to suppress it. He had never indicated he felt anything beyond professional concern and perhaps friendship. The last thing she wanted was to make him uncomfortable by revealing feelings he did not share. But that night, as they sat on the porch watching another spectacular sunset, something shifted between them. Vincent had been unusually quiet, staring at the distant mountains with an expression Helena could not read. "What are you thinking about?" she asked finally. He was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he said, I am thinking about what will happen after Judge Harrison rules on your case. Assuming he dismisses the debt claim, you will be free to go wherever you want. You will not need federal protection anymore. That is what I want, is it not? To be free? But even as she said it, Helena felt a pang of loss. Freedom would mean leaving paradise, leaving Vincent. It is what you deserve. Vincent turned to look at her, and something in his eyes made her breath catch. But I confess I will miss our conversations when you're gone. I will miss them too. The admission felt dangerous, like stepping off a cliff without knowing how far she would fall. Helena. Vincent reached out and took her hand, his palm warm and calloused against hers. These past 7 days with you have been some of the best I have had in a very long time. You make me remember that there is more to life than duty and guilt. You make me want things I thought I had given up on. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. What things? A future. Happiness. Someone to share my life with instead of just moving from town to town alone. He squeezed her hand gently. I know we have not known each other long, and I know you have dreams of San Francisco in your dress shop. But I want you to know that if you ever wanted to stay here, or if you wanted company on your journey west, I would be honored. Helena stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Are you saying what I think you are saying? I am saying I care about you as more than just someone under my protection. I am saying that somewhere in the past week, I started falling in love with you. Vincent's voice was steady, but his eyes were vulnerable. I am saying that if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, I would like the chance to court you properly and see where this leads. Tears filled Helena's eyes, but they were tears of joy. I feel it too. I thought I was foolish for developing feelings so quickly, but I cannot help it. You are the kindest, most honorable man I have ever met, and being with you makes me feel safe in a way I have not felt in years. Vincent stood and gently pulled her to her feet, his hands framing her face. May I kiss you? Please, Helena breathed. He kissed her slowly, tenderly, as if she were something precious and fragile. Helena melted into him, her hands clutching his shirt as she kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside. It was her first real kiss, and it was perfect, sweet, and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. I have wanted to do that for days. Why did you wait? Because I wanted you to know my intentions were honorable, that I was not taking advantage of your vulnerability. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. You deserve to be courted properly, not rushed into something because of circumstances. Helena kissed him again, quick and fierce. You are a good man, Vincent Zane. I am trying to be, for you. They stood there holding each other as darkness fell over paradise. And for the first time since her father had disappeared, Helena felt like she might actually have a future worth looking forward to. The next day, Sullivan made his move. Helena was walking back to the boarding house from the general store where she had been buying fabric for another sewing project when a hand clamped over her mouth and another grabbed her arm, dragging her into the alley between two buildings. She tried to scream, but the hand was too tight, and then she was being shoved into a waiting wagon, Sullivan climbing in beside her. Told you we would do things the hard way if you did not cooperate, Sullivan said as the wagon lurched into motion. Should have taken my offer, girl. Helena fought against the ropes they were tying around her wrists, panic surging through her veins. They were leaving town, heading north toward Virginia City. Vincent would not know where she had gone until it was too late. She had to escape, had to find a way to signal for help. But there were 3 men in the wagon with her, and they had made sure the ropes were tight this time, learning from her previous escape. Helena forced herself to breathe slowly, to think. Vincent had taught her that panic was the enemy of clear thinking. She needed to stay calm and watch for an opportunity. They had been traveling for perhaps half an hour when she heard it, the sound of a horse galloping hard behind them. Sullivan heard it too and cursed, pulling his gun as he twisted to look back. Helena's heart leaped with hope. Vincent. It had to be Vincent. "Stop the wagon!" Vincent's voice rang out clear and authoritative. "Federal Marshal, stop now or I will shoot." Instead of stopping, the wagon driver whipped the horses into a faster pace. Sullivan aimed his gun at Vincent, and Helena did the only thing she could think of. She threw herself sideways, slamming into Sullivan and knocking his aim off just as he pulled the trigger. The shot went wild, and then Vincent was alongside the wagon, his horse matching their pace. "Let her go!" Vincent shouted. "She belongs to us!" Sullivan tried to aim again, but the jostling wagon made it impossible to get a clear shot. Vincent pulled ahead of them and then swung his horse directly into the path of the wagon. The driver had to haul on the reins to avoid a collision, and the wagon skidded to a stop in a cloud of dust. Vincent was off his horse in an instant, his revolver trained on Sullivan. "Step away from her, now." "You are outnumbered, Marshal," Sullivan said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. The other two men in the wagon had drawn their weapons, creating a tense standoff, and you are about to be charged with kidnapping a federal prisoner and assaulting a federal officer. Vincent's voice was ice cold, which carries a minimum sentence of 10 years in territorial prison. "Is that what you want?" Your employer has no legal claim to Miss Dawson, and he is currently being investigated for fraud and human trafficking by the Territorial Marshal Service. Did you think I would sit idle while you made threats? I have been gathering evidence all week." Vincent's eyes never wavered from Sullivan. "Now cut her loose and step away, or I will add murder to the list of charges when I shoot you where you stand." Helena had never heard Vincent sound like that before, hard and dangerous and completely certain. Sullivan must have heard the same thing because he slowly lowered his gun and pulled out a knife, cutting through the ropes binding her wrists. "This is not over," Sullivan muttered. "Yes, it is." Vincent gestured with his revolver. "All three of you down from the wagon. You are under arrest." What followed was a tense march back to paradise, with Sullivan and his men walking ahead of the wagon, while Vincent kept them covered with his gun and Helena drove. Her hands were shaking, but she managed to keep the horses steady, focusing on the solid presence of Vincent riding alongside. When they reached town, Sheriff Patterson was waiting with two deputies, having been alerted by Mrs. Chen, who had witnessed Helena's abduction. The three men were locked in the jail, and Vincent finally holstered his weapon, turning to Helena with concern etched in every line of his face. "Are you hurt? Did they harm you?" "I am fine. Frightened but not hurt." Helena was shaking with reaction now that the danger was past. "How did you find me so quickly?" "Mrs. Chen saw them take you and came running. I was only 2 streets away." Vincent's hands were gentle as he checked her wrists where the ropes had left new marks. "I am so sorry. I should have been with you. I should have anticipated. You saved me." Helena cut off his self-recrimination. "Again, you keep saving me, Vincent." He pulled her into his arms right there in the middle of Main Street, holding her tight. "I could not lose you. When I realized they had taken you, His voice broke slightly. "I cannot lose someone else I care about." Helena held him just as tightly, understanding the depth of fear he must have felt, the memories of his sister's fate that must have haunted him during that desperate ride. "You did not lose me. I am here. We are both safe." They stood there for a long moment before Vincent finally released her and stepped back, his professional composure sliding back into place, though his eyes still reflected his emotions. "Come on, let us get you back to the boarding house. Judge Harrison arrives tomorrow, and after today's incident, I suspect his ruling will be very clear." Mrs. Chen fussed over Helena for the rest of the evening, serving her hot tea and insisting she rest. Vincent stayed close, sitting in a chair by her bedroom door like a guard dog. When Helena protested that he needed rest too, he simply shook his head. "I will sleep when I know for certain you are safe." She did not argue further, too exhausted and emotionally wrung out to debate. Instead, she lay in bed watching him through the open doorway. This good man who had upended his life to protect her, who had risked everything to bring her back safely. She had told him she was falling in love with him, but the truth was she had already fallen completely. Vincent Zane had become essential to her in just over a week, and she could not imagine her future without him in it. Judge Harrison arrived in Paradise the next afternoon, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He set up court in the Wells Fargo office and spent several hours reviewing documents and hearing testimony. Vincent presented the evidence he had gathered about Sullivan's employer, including sworn statements from 3 other young women who had been coerced into similar situations based on fabricated debts. Helena testified about her father's disappearance and the circumstances of her arrest, answering the judge's questions honestly and completely. Sullivan, still in custody, was brought in to present his case, but could produce no credible evidence that Robert Dawson had actually owed the claimed amount. The hearing lasted well into the evening. When Judge Harrison finally rendered his verdict, his voice was stern and uncompromising. I find that the debt claim against Miss Helena Dawson is fraudulent and without merit. She bears no legal responsibility for her father's alleged gambling losses, and any contract purporting to transfer that responsibility to her is void and unenforceable. Miss Dawson is hereby released from all claims and is free to go as she pleases. He turned his sharp gaze on Sullivan. As for you and your associates, you will be transferred to Carson City to face charges of kidnapping, fraud, and conspiracy. The Territorial Marshal Service will be investigating your employer and any other individuals involved in this scheme. Helena felt her knees go weak with relief. Free. She was actually free. Vincent caught her elbow, steadying her, his expression one of deep satisfaction. Thank you, Your Honor, Helena managed to say. Thank Deputy Zane, Judge Harrison replied. His thorough investigation and dedication to your case made this ruling possible. You are fortunate to have had him as your advocate, Miss Dawson. I know, Helena said softly, looking up at Vincent. I am very fortunate. After the hearing concluded and the paperwork was finalized, Vincent walked Helena back to the boarding house through streets lit by lanterns and the glow of saloon windows. It was fully dark now, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds, and the air had cooled to a pleasant temperature. It is really over, Helena said wonderingly. I can go anywhere I want, do anything I want. What do you want? Vincent asked quietly. She stopped walking and turned to face him. I want to open my dress shop. I want to create beautiful things and build a life I can be proud of. But most of all, I want to do it with you beside me. Vincent's smile was slow and genuine, transforming his usually serious face. I was hoping you would say that. I spoke with Judge Harrison this afternoon. He has agreed to write me a recommendation for the Marshal Service in California. San Francisco has a federal office that is currently looking for experienced deputies. Helena's heart soared. You would leave Nevada? Give up your position here? This position was always temporary, and I meant what I said the other night. I want a future, Helena. I want it with you. He took both her hands in his. If you will have me, I would like to court you properly. I would like to move to San Francisco and support your dream while pursuing my own work. And someday when you are ready, I would like to marry you and build a life together. When I am ready? Helena laughed, tears streaming down her face. Vincent Zane, I am ready right now. I love you. I think I started loving you the moment you took off those shackles and offered me trust instead of imprisonment. I love you too. He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Helena kissed him back with all the joy and relief and hope flooding through her. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Vincent rested his hand against her cheek. We should probably wait at least a few months before getting married. Give ourselves time to be sure. I am already sure, Helena said firmly, but I will wait if that is what you think is proper. What I think is that you are the most remarkable woman I have ever met, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me. They sealed that promise with another kiss, standing in the middle of Paradise's quiet street. Two people who had found each other against all odds and were determined to build something lasting together. The next few weeks passed in a flurry of preparation and planning. Vincent arranged for Sullivan and his associates to be transferred to Carson City and submitted his resignation to the Marshal Service, giving them a month's notice. Helena sold her sewing services to as many people as would hire her, saving every dollar toward their new life in San Francisco. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Paradise Church, with Mrs. Chen and Sheriff Patterson as witnesses and Judge Harrison performing the service during another visit to town. Helena wore a dress she had sewn herself, cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, and she carried a small bouquet of wildflowers. Vincent wore his best suit and looked so handsome that Helena's breath caught when she first saw him standing at the altar. "Dearly beloved," Judge Harrison began, and Helena barely heard the rest of the ceremony, focused entirely on Vincent's face and the love she saw reflected there. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, and Vincent kissed her, Helena felt a joy so complete it almost hurt. "Mrs. Zane," Vincent murmured against her lips. "Mr. Zane," she replied with a smile. The small reception at Mrs. Chen's boarding house was cheerful and warm, with food and music and well wishes from the people of Paradise, who had come to know and respect both of them. Helena danced with her new husband, his arms strong around her, and thought about how impossible this happiness would have seemed just a month ago when she'd been a desperate prisoner with no hope for the future. "What are you thinking?" Vincent asked, swaying with her to the music. "I'm thinking about how much my life has changed, how you changed everything." Helena looked up at him. "Do you ever regret it? Taking on my case, putting yourself at risk?" "Never." Vincent's answer was immediate and certain. "You are the best thing that has ever happened to me, Helena. Saving you saved me too, in a way. You gave me a reason to look forward instead of always looking back at what I had lost." "We saved each other, then?" "I think we did." They spent their wedding night in Vincent's room at the boarding house, which seemed appropriate since that was where their courtship had begun. Vincent was gentle and patient with Helena's inexperience, and she marveled at the intimacy of learning to be with someone this way, of trusting someone so completely with her body and heart. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, she felt a contentment she had never known before. "Tell me about San Francisco," Vincent said, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "What will we do when we get there?" Helena smiled in the darkness. "First, we find a place to live. Nothing fancy at first, just a small apartment or house we can afford. Then I will start looking for work as a seamstress to build up capital while you get established at the marshal's office. Within a year, hopefully, I will have saved enough to rent a small shop space and start my business properly." "What will you call it, your shop?" "I have not decided yet. Something elegant but approachable." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "What about you? What do you hope for in California?" "Honestly, I hope for less excitement than I had here in Paradise." Vincent smiled wryly. "I want to do good work, help people who need it. But I also want to come home to you every night and live a relatively peaceful life. Maybe in a few years we can buy a real house with a yard. Start a family if you want that." "I do want that," Helena said softly. "I want children with you. I want to give them the stable, loving home I never had." "Then we will make that happen." Vincent pulled her back down against him. Together. They left Paradise 2 days later, taking the stage to Carson City, and from there the train to Sacramento, and finally San Francisco. The journey took 4 days, and Helena spent much of it staring out the window at the changing landscape, amazed by the mountains and valleys, and eventually the glimpses of ocean that appeared as they approached the coast. San Francisco in the autumn of 1878 was everything Helena had dreamed and more. The city sprawled across hills overlooking the bay, a bustling metropolis of over 200,000 people, with cable cars climbing steep streets and ships crowding the harbor. The air smelled of salt water and possibility. Vincent had arranged for them to stay in a modest boarding house in the Richmond district while they searched for permanent housing. The landlady, a cheerful Irish woman named Mrs. O'Brien, welcomed them warmth and helped Helena navigate the unfamiliar city during those first overwhelming days. Vincent reported to the federal building downtown and was officially hired as a deputy marshal for the Northern California district. His experience and Judge Harrison's glowing recommendation had secured him a good position with fair pay. Helena was proud of him, watching him leave each morning in his uniform with his badge polished and his duty clear. She spent her days exploring the city and introducing herself to the various dress shops and tailors, offering her services and studying what styles were popular in San Francisco society. The fashion here was more sophisticated than what she had known in Nevada, with emphasis on the latest designs from Paris and New York. Helena absorbed everything like a sponge, her clever fingers itching to work with the beautiful fabrics she saw in shop windows. Within a month, she had secured steady work as a seamstress for one of the city's established dressmakers, a demanding French woman named Madame Rousseau who recognized Helena's talent and was willing to teach her the finer points of haute couture in exchange for long hours and dedication. Helena worked hard, sometimes coming home with her fingers sore from stitching, but she was happy. She was learning and saving money and building toward her dream. Vincent's work kept him busy, but not dangerously so. His cases mostly involved tracking down fugitives who had fled to California from other jurisdictions and investigating federal crimes like mail robbery and counterfeiting. He was good at his job, methodical and thorough, and his supervisors quickly came to rely on him. In the evenings, they would meet back at the boarding house and share dinner while talking about their days. Vincent would tell stories about the characters he encountered on the job, and Helena would describe the elaborate gowns she was helping create for society ladies preparing for balls and dinner parties. They walked along the beach on Sundays, holding hands and watching the waves crash against the shore, marveling that they had really made it to California together. 6 months after arriving in San Francisco, they moved into a small house near Golden Gate Park, a charming place with 2 bedrooms and a yard where Helena immediately started planting flowers. It was their first real home together, and they furnished it slowly with pieces bought secondhand or made by Vincent in the evenings. He turned out to have a talent for carpentry, a skill learned from his father in Texas, and he built Helena a beautiful sewing table and shelves to store her fabric and supplies. "This is perfect," Helena said the day they finished arranging everything, looking around their cozy parlor with its comfortable furniture and bright curtains. "This feels like a real home." "That is because it is," Vincent said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Our home. The first of many happy years together." Helena leaned back against him, feeling safe and loved and exactly where she belonged. "I am so glad I did not make it to California alone. I am so glad I met you instead." "So am I, Mrs. Zane, so am I." A year after they arrived in San Francisco, Helena had saved enough money to rent a small shop space on Fillmore Street. It was not much, just a single room with big windows and good light, but it was hers. She spent weeks preparing for the opening, sewing sample dresses to display and commissioning a sign that read "Helena's Fine Dresses" in elegant script. Vincent helped her paint the interior and install proper dress forms and a counter for customers. On the day before the grand opening, he surprised her with a gift, a polished wooden plaque that read "Proprietor Mrs. Helena Zane" to hang beside the door. "You did it," he said, kissing her temple. "You made your dream real." Helena looked around her shop at the dresses hanging on display and the fabrics arranged by color and the sewing machine she had been able to afford with her savings, and she felt overwhelming gratitude. "We did it. None of this would have been possible without you supporting me, believing in me. You would have found a way even without me. You are the most determined person I know." Vincent smiled. "But I am honored to have been part of your journey." The shop opened the next morning, and within a week, Helena had her first 3 commissions. Word spread about the talented young dressmaker on Fillmore Street who could create fashionable designs at reasonable prices, and soon Helena found herself working long hours to keep up with demand. Madame Rousseau, far from being offended that her former employee had opened a competing shop, actually sent customers Helena's way, women who wanted quality work but could not afford Madame Rousseau's premium prices. Helena hired her first employee within 6 months, a shy Chinese girl named May who had a gift for embroidery. Together, they created dresses that became sought after by San Francisco's emerging middle class, women who wanted to look fashionable without spending a fortune. Vincent continued his work as a marshal, steadily building a reputation as a skilled investigator who could be trusted to handle sensitive cases with discretion. He was offered a promotion to senior deputy after 2 years, but turned it down because it would have required more travel, and he did not want to be away from Helena for extended periods. "I have no interest in advancement if it means sacrificing time with my wife," he told his supervisor firmly. "My marriage comes first." Helena loved him even more for that decision, for always putting their relationship first even when it might have cost him professionally, but it did not cost him. His supervisors respected his dedication to both duty and family, and he continued to receive the most interesting and challenging cases. 3 years after they arrived in San Francisco, Helena discovered she was pregnant. She had been feeling unwell for weeks, exhausted and queasy, and when the doctor confirmed her suspicions, she was filled with a mixture of joy and terror. She wanted this baby desperately, but she also worried about how she would manage the shop and motherhood. Vincent's reaction when she told him was everything she could have hoped for. He swept her into his arms, his face alight with happiness, and murmured, "A baby. We're going to have a baby." Then he immediately started worrying about her health, insisting she rest more and not work such long hours. "I am pregnant, not dying," Helena laughed. "Women have babies all the time and continue their lives. But you are my wife, and this is our child. I want to make sure you are both healthy and safe." Vincent's hand rested gently on her still flat stomach. "Promise me you will take care of yourself, sure." "I promise," Helena agreed, touched by his concern. She continued working at the shop throughout her pregnancy, with May and a second employee she had hired taking on more of the physical labor as Helena grew larger. Customers were understanding and supportive, often bringing baby clothes and advice when they came for fittings. Their son was born in the spring of 1882, a healthy baby with Vincent's gray eyes and Helena's dark hair. They named him Marcus Robert Zane, Marcus after Vincent's father and Robert after Helena's, despite his failings, because they both believed in honoring the past even as they built a better future. Vincent was a devoted father from the first moment, holding his son with careful reverence and helping with nighttime feedings despite his own exhaustion from work. Helena watched him rock the baby at 3 a.m, singing soft Spanish lullabies he remembered from his childhood, and her heart overflowed with love for her small family. "He is perfect," Vincent whispered one night, looking down at Marcus sleeping in his arms, "just like his mother." "He is ours," Helena replied. "That is what makes him perfect." As Marcus grew from infant to toddler, Helena managed to balance motherhood and running her shop with the help of her employees and Mrs. O'Brien, who had become a close friend and unofficial grandmother to Marcus. The shop continued to thrive, and Helena was able to move to a larger space and hire 2 more seamstresses to handle the increasing demand. Vincent remained with the Marshal Service, his work keeping him engaged without consuming his life. He made a point of coming home for dinner every evening unless a case absolutely required otherwise, and he spent his weekends taking Marcus to the park or teaching him to ride the new cable cars that had made navigating San Francisco's hills so much easier. When Marcus was 3 years old, Helena discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect and had a better support system in place. Their daughter was born in the winter of 1885, a tiny thing with wisps of blonde hair and her father's serious expression even as a newborn. They named her Margaret Ann, Margaret after Vincent's sister and Ann after Helena's mother. Vincent cried when Helena suggested the name, moved beyond words that she would honor his lost sister that way. "She would have loved you," he told Helena, holding baby Margaret with tears still wet on his cheeks. "She would have loved knowing we named our daughter after her." "Then she knows now," Helena said gently, "and she is happy for us." Margaret was a more challenging baby than Marcus had been, prone to colic and needing constant attention. Helena was exhausted managing the shop and 2 young children, But Vincent picked up the slack at home without complaint. He would walk Margaret for hours in the evenings when she would not stop crying, singing to her and patting her back until she finally settled. Marcus, meanwhile, was growing into a bright and curious child who loved listening to his father's stories about lawmen and outlaws. Vincent would tone down the violence and play up the adventure, making Marcus giggle with tales of clever marshals outwitting bumbling criminals. The years passed in a blur of work and family and small joys. Helena's shop became one of the most successful dressmakers in the Richmond district, known for quality and creativity. Vincent continued his work as a marshal, occasionally dealing with dangerous situations, but mostly enjoying the steady rhythm of investigation and problem-solving. Marcus started school and proved to be an excellent student. Margaret grew into a spirited toddler who kept everyone on their toes. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Vincent surprised Helena with a trip back to Paradise, Nevada. They left the children with Mrs. O'Brien and took the train across California and into Nevada, watching the landscape change from green coastal hills to desert brown. Paradise had changed in the decades since they left. The population had dwindled as the mines played out, and many of the buildings Helena remembered stood empty. But the church where they had been married was still there, and Mrs. Chen still ran her boarding house, now catering mostly to travelers passing through rather than miners. "You came back," Mrs. Chen exclaimed when she saw them, embracing them both with genuine joy. "Look at you two, so happy and successful. I always knew you would do well together." They spent 3 days in Paradise, visiting old friends and sharing stories about their lives in San Francisco. Vincent took Helena to the spot where he had stopped Sullivan's wagon that terrible day, and they stood there holding hands, remembering how close they had come to losing each other. "If things had gone differently that day," Helena said quietly, "I might never have made it to San Francisco. We might never have had the life we have." But things did not go differently. Vincent pulled her close. "We found each other. We fought for each other, and we built something beautiful together. That is what matters." On their last evening in Paradise, they walked to the cemetery on the edge of town. Vincent stood for a long time at a grave marked with a simple stone. Margaret Ann Zane, beloved sister, 1856, 1875. Helena stood beside him, her hand in his, giving him the silent support he needed. "I wish she could have met you," Vincent said finally. "I wish she could have seen that the world is not all darkness and cruelty, that sometimes good things happen to good people." "She knows," Helena said, echoing what she had told him years ago when their daughter was born. "Wherever she is, she knows you are happy, and that is what she would have wanted for you." Vincent nodded, brushing tears from his eyes. "Thank you for coming here with me, for understanding why I needed to do this." "Always," Helena promised. "We are partners in everything, remember?" They left Paradise the next day and returned to San Francisco, to their children and their home and their busy lives. But something had shifted in Vincent, a lightness that suggested he had finally made peace with his past. He smiled more easily, laughed more often, and seemed more fully present in each moment. The years continued to unfold in contentment and purpose. Marcus grew into a thoughtful teenager who wanted to follow his father into law enforcement. Vincent encouraged him, but insisted he finish his education first and think carefully about the dangers and responsibilities involved. Margaret proved to have inherited her mother's eye for design and spent hours at the shop watching Helena work, eventually learning to sew herself. Helena's business continued to flourish. By 1895, she employed 8 seamstresses and had expanded into a second location in downtown San Francisco. She was invited to join the city's Chamber of Commerce, one of the few women members, and she used her position to advocate for better working conditions and fair wages for female workers throughout the city. Vincent, now in his mid-40s, had been promoted to Chief Deputy Marshal for the Northern California District despite his earlier reluctance to accept advancement. The position came with more administrative duties, but also allowed him to mentor younger marshals and shape department policy. He used his influence to push for reforms in how law enforcement treated female victims and witnesses, drawing on everything he had learned from Helena's case all those years ago. On a warm evening in September 1896, Vincent came home to find Helena sitting on the porch of their house, now a larger property they had purchased 5 years earlier with a view of the ocean in the distance. Their children were grown now, Marcus training at the police academy and Margaret apprenticing with a prominent dressmaker in preparation for eventually taking over Helena's business. "What are you thinking about?" Vincent asked, settling into the rocking chair beside her, the same question he had asked her countless times over 18 years of marriage. "I am thinking about how far we have come," Helena replied, reaching for his hand. "From Paradise, Nevada to here, from prisoner and protector to partners and parents, it has been quite a journey. The best journey of my life." Vincent brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I meant what I said that day in Paradise. Saving you saved me. You gave me everything I thought I had lost the right to hope for." "We gave each other everything," Helena corrected. "That is what love is it not? Two people making each other better, stronger, happier than they could ever be alone." "I suppose it is," Vincent smiled. That warm, genuine smile that still made Helena's heart skip even after all these years. "So what comes next for us, Mrs. Zane? Our children are nearly grown and independent. We have built successful careers. What is our next adventure?" Helena squeezed his hand, her eyes sparkling with mischief and affection. "I think our next adventure is growing old together, becoming grandparents someday, watching our children build their own lives while we enjoy the life we have created. Sitting on this porch every evening and remembering how lucky we are to have found each other." "That sounds perfect." Vincent leaned over and kissed her softly. "Absolutely perfect." And it was. They spent the next 20 years doing exactly that, supporting their children through their own marriages and careers, welcoming 5 grandchildren into the family, and never taking for granted the love they had found in the most unlikely circumstances. Helena's dress shop became a San Francisco institution, passed down to Margaret, who expanded it further. Marcus became a respected police captain known for his integrity and fairness. Vincent retired from the Marshal Service in 1905 at the age of 54, ready to spend his remaining years focused entirely on family and leisure. He and Helena traveled, visiting the ocean towns along the California coast and even taking a trip back to Texas, where Vincent showed her the ranch where he had grown up. They hosted Sunday dinners for their growing family, their table always crowded with children and grandchildren and laughter. On a quiet evening in the spring of 1917, as the sun set over the Pacific Ocean visible from their porch, Vincent and Helena sat in their rocking chairs holding hands as they had done for nearly 40 years of marriage. Vincent was 66 now, his dark hair silver and his face lined with age, but his eyes were still that steady gray that had first captured Helena's attention in Paradise all those years ago. Helena, at 61, had her own silver hair and the slight stiffness in her hands that came from decades of needlework. But she was still beautiful to Vincent, still the woman who had changed his entire life. "Do you remember the first night we sat on a porch together?" Helena asked, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "In Paradise, when you told me you were falling in love with me? Of course I remember. I was terrified you would laugh at me or tell me I was foolish." Vincent chuckled at the memory. "Instead, you told me you felt the same way. Best moment of my life up to that point." "Only up to that point?" "Well, our wedding day was better, and the days our children were born, and our grandchildren." Vincent pretended to think hard. "Actually, every day with you has been the best day of my life. They just keep getting better." Helena laughed, the sound still bright and joyful. "You are a terrible romantic, Vincent Zane. You always have been." "Only with you." He squeezed her hand gently. "Only ever with you." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and the first stars appeared. Two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built a life more rich and full than either had dared to dream. Vincent thought about that desperate ride to save Helena from Sullivan's wagon, how his heart had pounded with fear and determination. He thought about seeing her walk down the aisle toward him in her handmade dress, about holding each of his children for the first time, about every laugh and tear and ordinary moment they had shared. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For trusting me that day in paradise when you had every reason not to. For choosing to stay instead of running. For building this life with me." Vincent turned to look at his wife, his partner, his best friend. "For loving me." Helena's eyes filled with happy tears. "Thank you for making sure my last escape was from loneliness and fear into love and happiness. You did not just protect me, Vincent. You gave me a life worth living." "We gave each other that," Vincent said, echoing her words from years ago. "And I would not change a single moment of it." They sat together on the porch well into the night, wrapped in blankets against the cool ocean breeze, holding hands and remembering their long journey from paradise to this moment. Behind them, their house glowed with light and warmth, a testament to everything they had built together. Around them, San Francisco hummed with life, the city they had made their home. And in that moment, sitting beside the person they loved most in the world, both Helena and Vincent knew with absolute certainty that they had found their happy ending. Not because life had been easy or simple, but because they had faced it together, choosing each other every single day for nearly 4 decades. The cowboy who had made sure her last escape was into his arms, and his heart had given Helena the greatest gift imaginable, a lifetime of love, partnership, and joy. And Helena had given Vincent an equally precious gift: redemption, purpose, and the family he had thought he would never have. Together they had created something beautiful and lasting, a love story that would be passed down through their children and grandchildren for generations to come. And as they finally rose from their rocking chairs and went inside to the warmth of their home, both of them knew that this was exactly where they were meant to be, exactly where they had always been meant to end up. Together, always together until the very end and beyond.